I'm going to show you an absolutely insane game played by Magnus Carlsen at the European Team Championships in Budva, Montenegro. The game is just fantastic. You will enjoy every move which has been played. So let's dive straight into the action. It's round 2. Magnus Carlsen playing with the black pieces against Valentin Dragnev from Austria. And well, it's fascinating to see how much risk the former world champion, the current world's number one, is willing to take against players who are around 200, 250 points lower rated than him. And we will see how it's gonna end. For now, I would like to thank you all for joining the channel, subscribing, and of course, the next couple of weeks, months, years, much more games will be covered on this channel. So make sure to become a subscriber and a member of this Robert Riss chess community. Now we are going to have a look at the game. Dragnev starts with the move 1 e4 and we get to see the Sicilian e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. It's the Rossolimo variation of which Magnus Carlsen is the leading expert. He is playing it with both colors. We have seen him playing with the black pieces also on the World Championship match against Fabiano Caruana some years ago. And ever since, this line has just gained in popularity. And there is now a lot of opening theory there as well. So let's just quickly go through that. Magnus goes for the system with e6. And after castling kingside, he develops the knight to e7 to protect it. Be ready to take back with the knight in case white was considering to take on c6. He could have done it actually a move earlier so that black is forced to double the pawns. But castling kingside, knight ge7 is one of the main lines as well. Now rook e1 is played, and the most popular continuation here is the move a6. And questioning what the bishop is going to do. And because white has played rook e1, the bishop is ready to go back to f1. A lot of theory there, but the modern main line here is to play the move knight d4. Attacking the bishop on b5. White captures. Knight takes d4, c takes d4. And then white wants to get rid of that annoying pawn on d4, which sort of hinders white from completing its development. Black goes a6, questioning the bishop. Bishop goes back to f1. And now the knight comes into c6. And black is ready to recapture with that knight on d4. And now white comes up with an original idea. Well, nowadays nothing is original. This has all been seen before. White plays the move b4, grabbing some space on the queen side. And after bishop e7, white grabs more space with the move a4. Black castles. And now the move knight a3 played. So we can see that if white were allowed to play one more move, he would probably go for the move b5 and try to chase that knight away from the c6 square, after which the pawn on d4 will be able to be taken by white. So d takes c3, this is the moment to take that pawn. White recaptures and the bishop goes to f6. And until here, we are following a game played by Magnus Carlsen back in 2021. He was playing with black against MVL, Maxime Faucher-Legrave, and MVL played here b5. And strangely enough, okay, it was an online game, mistakes were made by both players, but here, the move bishop takes c3 could just have been played by Magnus, and I have absolutely no idea why he didn't play that move, because if white is going to take that knight on c6, the rook on a1 can just be taken. So it looks as if b5 was just a big mistake. Dragnev, probably familiar with that game, he must have seen it. He went for bishop b2 to protect the pawn. And now black is for a choice. Seems very logical to try to break free here with the move d5. But Magnus, he doesn't want to initiate some exchanges. He wants to keep pieces on the board. Plays the move d6. And after queen b3, queen c7, rook a1, white has brought all its pieces into the game. Rook d8. White goes knight c4. Now we see that the knight was standing at the side of the board, but now comes in to c4. That's a good idea. Black goes b6. Knight goes to e3. Where's the knight going? Bishop b7, and now the knight goes to g4, hitting this bishop on f6. And black obviously doesn't want to allow that capture, because that would ruin the pawn formation in front of the black king. So the bishop goes away to g5, and that was the idea. The bishop has been chased away from that diagonal, and white can now open up the diagonal for its bishop with the move c4. Black goes for the move h5. That's a very Ambitious move, checking what this knight is gonna do. For instance, if the knight goes back to e3, it looks like the only available square. But then knight e5 will be played and black is doing absolutely fine. The rook can quickly come to c8. I don't see any problems here. It will be hard for white to prove that the pawn on h5 is a weakening one for black. But instead of moving the knight away, white played the move queen c3, setting up a battery of queen and bishop threatening. Checkmate on g7. How should this threat be parried? Well, probably a move like e5 could be considered. So the knight is still hanging, knight d4 can be played. White is maybe a little bit better here, but it's a game. But Magnus makes another pawn move. Play the move f6. That's a very ambitious move. Second pawn move in front of its king after h5. Now the other pawn goes to f6. Very ambitious, but at least the queen is now in touch with the king side, so it's not easy to get something going there. But Dragnev plays very energetically now with the move h4, counter-attacking the bishop. The bishop doesn't have that many good squares to go to. If you take the knight, it's h takes g5 and black's king side gets open. This is looking very dangerous for black. So instead, Magnus takes the pawn on h4. And now white's idea was to swing the queen over to the other side of the board, attacking the bishop. If the bishop goes away, then the pawn on h5 can be taken. And well, all of a sudden the white queen joins the attack. After queen h3, h takes g4 was played instead. And now white captures the bishop. Knight takes b4. The pawn is hanging. But obviously black's king side is quite vulnerable. White played the move rook e3, bringing the rook over into the attack via the third rank. Let's see where the rook is going next. It should be said that the pawn on g4 could have been taken as well immediately, attacking both the pawn on e6 as well as threatening bishop takes f6. In that case, the move e5 is absolutely forced. But here, apparently there's a very strong move, which is difficult to see, probably overlooked by both players. It's the invisible move c5, with the idea to clear the diagonal for the bishop. The bishop wants to come to c4 to hit the king. Now if you take that pawn and cover that square, it's a rook c1, attacking the queen. After the queen goes away, the bishop comes to c4. It's very dangerous. There are still ways for black to defend better. For instance, get the bishop to c8 to attack the queen. But okay, a lot of complicated lines there. Let's have a look at what happened in the game. Rook e3, as I said. Now e5 was played anyway, so you're trying to close this diagonal. Queen takes g4 on the board and now bishop c8. That's the strategy. So white's bishop on b2 is out of play. And the bishop on b7 now is coming to the other diagonal, attacking the queen. Queen h4 played. And here we have another very important moment. Because what should black do? I think Magnus played the most human continuation. Bishop e6, getting the bishop to a square where it's just guarding still the h3 square, preventing the rook from getting there. It's guarding the diagonal towards the king. But it's not good, as we will get to see. What should black have done instead is the move g5, another pawn move, attacking the queen. But the point is that if you now swing over with the rook to pin that pawn on g5, black is not allowed to take the queen. Then queen g7 and black is able to consolidate its king's position. The pawns are far away from the king, but the black pieces are able to help out. Let's have a look. Bishop e6 played by Magnus, rook g3, threatening queen takes f6 as the pawn on g7 is pinned. And now black has a problem. If you bring the queen to f7 to protect that pawn, bishop will come to e2, intending to go to h5 to attack the queen. The queen is vulnerable, and if the bishop lands on g6, there are a lot of attacking ideas against that black king. So Magnus went for rook f8 instead. It's a different way of protecting the pawn. But now all of a sudden, all of white's pieces are joining the attack. Now bishop first is improved from b2 to this diagonal. It's on its way to h6 to target that pawn on g7. Rook a7. Very effective defensive idea along the 7th rank. Bishop e2. The other bishop comes into play as well. And black goes for the move queen d8. keeping everything protected so far. But it has to be said, this position is very, very suspicious for black. Just for one pawn, white has an overwhelming advantage. But the idea of the last move, queen d8, is that now bishop h5, with the idea to go bishop g6, queen h7 with checkmate, can still be met by g5. Not really attacking the queen, at least not for the moment. But you're about to go rook g7 or perhaps even rook h7 when black is hanging in there. Maybe a move like f4, it's a very good idea, trying to open up the position. And if you take on f4, it's bishop takes f4, and also the pawn on d6 is difficult to defend. I think white is having a very nice attacking prospects in this case. But Dragnev goes for rook g6. He's trying to get a rook into the attack. Rook d7, overprotecting the pawn, and now king h2. Rook f2, f7. What is Magnus contemplating here? Well, the idea is to evacuate the king to the center. That's a very important defensive strategy. And Dragnev continued here with the plan he just initiated on the previous move. With rook h1, he wants to get the other rook over, but that enables black to get the king to the center. What should have been played instead? Well, better, even better now, and that's difficult to calculate. It's bishop h6. And you have all sorts of ideas to get the other bishop to h5, a lot of pressure on the black king. And most importantly, this move, king f8, it's not possible. It would run into bishop g4. You're trying to remove this defender. If you take this bishop on g4, now bang! Bishop takes g7 is totally killing. After rook takes g7, it's queen h8 with check. And on the next move, it's rook takes g7 with check. And the queen will probably be lost as well. This is gonna be game over. Crushing attack for white. But back to the game, rook h1 was played instead. King f8, king g1, and now king is on e7. That makes a huge difference. I'm not saying the king is safe there, but it's at least safer than it was on g8. Queen g3, attacking the pawn on g7. Queen g8, and the bishop comes into play as well, attacking the pawn on b6. And well, maybe you should give up that pawn with a move like a5, and after bishop takes b6, get the knight back to a6 and later to c5. There are hopes, at least for black, to hold on here. But white is in all the lines clearly better still. Rook b7, very understandable. Just protecting the pawn was played. And now f4. Dragnev keeps the pressure high, intending to bring up the pawn to f5 probably. E takes f4, bishop takes f4. Attacking the pawn on d6. And if you can take it, then you capture the pawn with check, as well as the knight on b4 is hanging. Rook d7. And what should white do now? This is a very instructive moment, but we are approaching the time control here. Move 40. Dragnev went for the move rook h5. But now, beautiful idea here is to open up the position with the move a5 to deflect this pawn. If you take it, the other pawn comes to c5. With ideas to take on d6. If you take that pawn, the bishop goes back to e3, threatening to take on c5. And this position is almost impossible to defend because the queen covers the c7 square. The rook cannot go there. If you protect the pawn on c5 with queen c8, then the pawn on g7 is hanging. So here we see that white is able to attack the black king from both sides of the board. But was not played. Rook h5 on the board, knight c6, the knight is on its way to e5 to set up a blockade. Queen h4, threatening rook h8 to trap the queen, and you would expect the queen to just go away. You no longer have to keep that pawn defended. The key move here is queen to a8, not played by Magnus. You're indirectly attacking the pawn. The point is that after rook h7, white is going after that pawn, knight e5 is there, you're holding that piece on f7, so white is allowed to take on g7, but then the black queen will take on e4, and it's anybody's game. Anything can happen here. Magnus instead played the move rook d8 to prevent the white rook from coming to h8. Now queen f2 played, attacking the pawn on b6, and Magnus defends it with the move rook to b8. Magnus is hanging in there, but Move 41. White and also black gets additional time. Dragnev played the move a5. So he found this idea, with the idea that if you take that pawn, it's c5 and it's a crushing attack against the black king. So instead, knight takes a5 was played. And well, what should be done now? The best move was not played. It's queen g3. And this is such a strong move because you're attacking that pawn on d6. Now that knight has been chased away from c6, it cannot block on e5. If you go rook d8, now there's an absolutely insane line, which is difficult to calculate, but white can just break through here with e5. If you take that pawn, it's bishop takes, and the center gets opened. If you take the bishop, it's rook takes e5, both rooks hitting the bishop on e6, rook d6, and now boom, c5, another pawn sacrifice. Everything needs to be sacrificed to get closer to the king, to get access. If you take on c5, it's queen g5 check. And if the king goes away, rook takes e6, rook takes queen d5, and whatever you do, white is going to take the rook on the next move. Very difficult line, as I said, but white could have won with this spectacular variation. Instead, queen d4 was played. So you're threatening to take on d6. Now the queen goes to d8, keeping the rook on b8 to protect the pawn on b6. The pawn on g7 doesn't need to be defended now. Rook h7 played, attacking the pawn on g7. Knight c6, coming back into the game, hitting the queen. Queen d2 back. And now queen c7, holding on to the pawn on d6. Rook takes g7. And the rook comes to f8 to protect that pawn. Sorry, to protect the pawn, to protect the rook, of course. Bishop h5. Trying to put pressure on this rook. Now the problem is black cannot take on g7. If you do so, bishop f7, there's a beautiful tactic. Bishop takes f7. If you take with the rook, now we have bishop takes d6, forcing the queen to take. Otherwise you lose the queen, and rook takes f7, deflecting the king from its defensive duty, and white wins the queen. So after bishop h5, black cannot save the rook, but Magnus comes up with a resourceful idea, knight d8. And after bishop takes f7, white captures the exchange. Rook takes f7. Black is fighting here. He has one pawn for the exchange, and the knight is ready to come to f7. Bishop e3, putting pressure on this pawn. Rook takes g7, rook takes knight f7. White should be better here probably, but it's not going to be easy because these pawns are still reasonably well defended by the black pieces. White played the move queen b4 here to attack the pawn on b6, but pawn on c4 is hanging as well. White can go for the exchange of queens and then take on b6, but Dragnev goes for queen takes b6. It's of course the most ambitious move. You are trying to get closer to the black king. Queen takes e4. Black is capturing the pawn. What's happening here? White played the move rook g8, but also queen c7 needs to be checked. Now don't play bishop d7, blocking the check because of rook takes f7, and white wins material. He remains a piece up. However, after king f8, there's no good follow-up. The rook is under threat and there are no mating threats. Rook is hanging. Queen is also attacking the bishop on e3. So no queen c7. Rook g8 played. And here, for the moment, there are no threats, but the game goes on. Bishop d7. Maybe at some point the bishop can come to this diagonal. If the rook is not there, it would be mate on g2. But still a lot of pieces on the board. White moves the bishop away so that the queen is free to move. Black goes queen d3, hoping for some check at some point. Rook g3. Attacking the queen. Rook can also come to e3 to hit the king from that side. Queen d1, king h2. Queen h5. White cannot block with the rook because bishop covers that square. King g1. And Magnus, being lost for most of the game, could have gone here for queen d1 with a repetition. But his team was 1 point behind. It was 2-1 for Austria. He needs to play for a win. Goes for the move queen b5, trying to keep the game going. After queen takes b5, a takes b5. Who knows? Maybe there's still something to play for. With 2 pawns, black is definitely not worse here. However, Queen e3 was played, knight e5 blocking the check, rook g7. Look what's happening here, king e6, the king gets activated. Queen h3 check, king d5, and there's no check. That's a remarkable situation. Black is even threatening to take the queen. Queen h7, and well, bishop is still defended by both the knight and the queen. Everything is under control. Black plays the move f5, the game goes on. Bishop g3, maybe that's a good idea. If you don't play it, you got to reckon also with maybe ideas like f4, maybe f3. Knight can come to g4, who knows what's happening. But with the bishop on g3, you always have the option to eliminate that knight if needed. This is a very important moment because ideally you would play here the move queen b1. And after king h2, if you could play here knight g4, check, looks as if black is winning. If you go king h3, it's queen h1 and it's going to be checkmate. But the problem is there is a rook takes g4. You can eliminate that knight as the pawn on f5 is pinned. If you take it, the black queen is hanging. So queen b1 check doesn't work. Magnus changed the move order. Started here with the move knight to g4, taking away these two squares from the king. So if black were to play, it's checkmate on b1. But by moving the knight away, white can give a check now. Queen to g8, bishop e6, queen a8 check. Now the queen comes over to the other side. King to d4. The king is just in the middle of the board. There are not that many good checks. And black is trying to get out of these checks. Queen a7, king to d3. The king is going even further away. Queen b1 is still the main threat. But rook b7 is there, attacking the queen and protecting the b1 square. Thanks to this X-ray motive, the rook controls the b1 square. And, well, white is attacking the queen and black got to do something with the queen. But there are not that many good squares available because the rook can always come back to b1, or maybe there's another check available. This queen on a7 also covers its own king, so there's no good queen check. Well, actually queen c5 was played in the game, forcing the exchange of queens. And after queen takes c5, the game was agreed to a draw at this point. Because if you do take back, and that's black of course is going to play that, there is rook b6 with an attack on both the bishop and the pawn on a6. And likely this is just going to end in a very equal endgame. For instance, if you go bishop d5, you can take the pawn, and then black is going to run with its pawn. And if you do get a chance, it may look dangerous, but there's just a simple check now. And you cannot block it. I mean, you can do it, but it's not recommendable here because of bishop e1. And white is going to take that pawn on the next move. So that means that the king has to move instead. If you go king e2, then the rook covers the c3 square and black is not able to make any progress. But black's pieces are so active that, okay, you're not able to make any progress here. You can give a check on a2 and then king d3 back, and it's like neither side is able to make progress. So I think that's the reason why both players agreed to a draw at this point. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating game. Tell me if you agree with me on that. Let me know in general your comments on Magnus's approach. Was it a good strategy to take such a risk? Let me know your opinions. And of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel to see more exciting games from this tournament. Thanks for watching. See you soon again. Bye bye.